Professor Wergeles here. We just used the onload event with our first function. Now we need to talk about the differences between functions in JavaScript. We can define a function like below, which is called a function declaration. You'll see I have the keyword function, and then I have the function's name, followed by the parentheses and the parameters of that function. In this case, this function has no parameters, and then I execute this block of code. So these are my brackets, and this is going to define a block of code. Now we can also treat functions like variables. In the example below, we're going to treat a function like a variable, and it's called a function expression. Now let's see what this looks like. I have a variable, let's call it page loaded, and I'm going to set this equal to an anonymous function. This function will have one parameter called x. Now, why do I call this an anonymous function? We'll see with this function, I have a name. The name of the function is called page loaded. However, with this function, I did not specify the name. So this function will be treated as anonymous. Now, I can do something similar. I can grab the box. I'm going to use the DOM. I'm going to use the DOM's method called getElementById and look for animate me. Then, once I have the box, I will use the box, change the style by changing the background color, let's say to whatever was passed in as a parameter. So here I have x, that's my parameter. Whatever the value is passed as a parameter is going to be changed as the background color. Now, this function expression ends with a semicolon. So one thing that I look when I'm looking at code is if I see a function with a semicolon, I know that's a function expression. The other thing is you'll see here I have a function that has no variable, but here I have a function that's set to a variable. The function declaration is a normal function that you may be used to. A function expression is a function that's stored in a variable. So you see here I have variable page loaded, and this anonymous function is stored into that variable. So that's a function declaration and a function expression. Now, if I want to call this function expression, I just use the variable. So it's almost the same. Based off the program, you may not be able to tell much of a difference. So let's say I want to load the color red. You'll see I'm mixing double and single quotes. You'll see here the background color needs to be a string. So I need to send a string up. However, the onload also requires a string, which goes to a function call. So you can either escape these quotes, or what programmers do is mix match double and single quotes. So here I have double quotes on the outside, single quotes on the inside. So JavaScript will treat this entire thing as a string. Once a function is called, it'll treat this as a string. So let's refresh the page, and you'll see the background color changes to red. So the function expression also works. Now, what's the main difference between a function expression and a function declaration? Let's write some notes so you can get this right on the exam. After a function expression has been stored in a variable, the variable can be used as a function. So we've seen that here in the onload. Now, the function up above, the function expression, ends with a semicolon because it is part of an executable statement. What does that mean? Well, here I have a function declaration. Now, this is going to load into memory but not be executed until the function is called. However, with the variable, let's say I'm using JavaScript and I write variable x is equal to 0. And I come over here, variable y is equal to 1. You'll see if I refresh the page, you'll see between these two variables I should have a semicolon. Why do I need a semicolon here? Well, when I assign this variable x is equal to 0, it's an executable statement. So after this line runs, x is now equal to 0. So it's going to load immediately. Same with this variable, page loaded. I'm setting a variable, instead of equal to a value, I'm setting it equal to a function. So this is part of an executable statement. So you can replace this function here with 0, and you'll see I need a semicolon afterwards, just like I do with this function expression. Next, both functions are actually doing the same thing. I'm changing one color to green and one color to whatever I pass, so I passed in red. But technically, they're doing the same thing. They're grabbing the element with ID equal to animate me and changing the background color to some color. So as far as functionality, they're both doing the same thing. And remember, A function without a name, like the one assigned to page loaded variable in the function expression above, is called an anonymous function. So this function right here is an anonymous function because I don't have a name like this function up above. So on an exam, if you ask what's an anonymous function, it's a function without a name. Or if I give you some code and I ask you, select the anonymous function, you should know which one that is. And that's what makes function expressions unique. Functions stored in variables do not need a function name because they are always invoked, which means they're called or executed using the variable's name. Now remember, in JavaScript, functions are like first-class citizens. That means you can store them in variables, pass them into other functions as arguments, organize them into arrays, store them in objects. You can do so much with functions in JavaScript. It's very flexible, and that's one reason I like JavaScript. Here I'm putting it into a variable. Here I have a function declaration. When I call them and execute them, they're doing the same thing. But the function expression is part of an executable statement. So it's going to be loaded into the variable immediately. Whereas the function declaration is loaded, but it's not executed until I call that function. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Now let's take a look at this first-class citizen effect. Let's say I create a variable called page really did load. You'll see I'm using camel case. Camel case, we call this lower camel case, usually starts with a lowercase letter. Then every word that's preceding the first word is capitalized. So that's going to be your camel case. You can also have upper camel case where the first character is uppercase. And I'm going to put the page loaded variable into this other variable. So I'm passing page loaded into page really did load. Now, when I call this here, let's say I change this to page really did load and pass in a parameter. Let's pass in a new parameter so we can see it change. Refresh. You'll see the page is now pink. So I can pass a function into a variable. I can pass that variable to another variable, and it's going to call that function the same. So let's put a note down to make sure we understand this here. Here I am passing page loaded to a new variable called page really did load, just to show the effect of functions in JavaScript. Okay, that's it for this video. We're still going through the lecture. We're going to go back to the slides. We're going to learn a concept about JavaScript scope, and then we will come back to the code. So stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video as we take a look at the slides.